All right, diving in today. We're tackling this idea, the Overton window.
Oh, yeah.
That range of stuff people consider, like, acceptable to talk about
Mm.
publicly, right? And our source this time, well, they say this window's shifting.
Oh, really?
Hard, like really hard to the left. And
Uh,
it's changing. Like, what we can even think
mhm.
is okay to say.
Like self-censorship almost.
Yeah, exactly. Before we even get to actually speaking it out loud.
Interesting.
It is, right. And I think what struck me is how they tie this shift to, I guess, tangible changes.
Oh, okay.
In society, they say it's not just some theory. It's like affecting policy,
Mm.
how we interact, even like what we see in the
It's
media.
the media, yeah.
And they specifically say, like, left-leaning institutions, they're the driving force.
So that raises the question then, who is actually, like, shaping what's acceptable?
Exactly. And they get into some, some hot-button issues to try and prove their point.
Like what?
Gender ideology, for one. They say the way we talk about gender identity, like, it's changed so fast
Right.
that it just has to be proof of this leftward push, you know? Think about it. Even just a few years ago, topics like teaching this stuff in schools or medical care for, transgender youth.
Right, right.
Or even just, like, the concept of gender being fluid.
It's definitely more mainstream now.
Totally. And they were fringe ideas not long ago at all, but now, mainstream.
And the source, they're saying this isn't just like progress happening. It's almost like forced. They say if you question this new normal, you get backlash, maybe even legal trouble, which is, I know. They even bring up like big tech in this, implying,
Censorship,
censorship, that these companies are silencing anyone who disagrees.
So it's like inclusivity has become so dominant.
Right.
That it's become, well, intolerant of other viewpoints.
That's just kind of ironic, right?
It really makes you wonder, is this just society naturally evolving? Or are there actually, powerful groups or people
Orchestrating it.
orchestrating it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, are we truly becoming more accepting as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there something else going on, something more deliberate?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The source definitely thinks there's an agenda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they highlight stuff like how the government funds certain types of education and how the media frames these really sensitive topics,
They even say there's this, like, urgency to it all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like it's not natural. It's got to be a planned thing to transform how we think.
Transform how we think. Wow.
That's their argument anyway, but it doesn't stop at gender.
Where else do they go?
They connect this whole Overton window shift to something that seems totally different.
Okay.
Anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism, all right.
And particularly on the left, they claim there's, like, growing sympathy for groups like Hamas.
Hamas.
And that shows just how far left that window swung, in their view at least.
This is tricky, though, right? Because we got a separate criticizing what a country does from prejudice against a whole group of people,
Absolutely. And the source, they use examples like rallies where support for Palestine seems to go too far, like minimizing.
Or even justifying.
Yeah, justifying Hamas's actions. They paint this picture of, like, Israel being the bad guy.
And anyone who supports them, the villain.
Exactly. And they tie it right back to media influence, saying, like, they control the narrative.
Media is a powerful force.
And they even use this term, like, propaganda press, which is...
loaded, for sure.
Yeah, a very loaded term. It throws a lot of weight around.
Makes you wonder, is there data to back up this anti-Semitism claim?
Right.
And how do we tell the difference between someone legitimately criticizing a government
versus hating a whole group of people?
That's the core of it.
It is, because it feels like they're presenting this very black and white view. You're either pro-Palestine, which they seem to equate with, like, being pro-Hamas, or you're against Palestinians entirely, which is,
like you said, oversimplifying.
Way oversimplified for such a complex situation.
And that leads to control the narrative through policy, media, even censorship.
But this question is, how much power do these groups really have over public opinion?
Right. Could other viewpoints be getting promoted too, even if our source doesn't mention them?
Exactly. And remember, we're not just repeating what the source says.
We're digging deeper.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out, do their arguments actually hold up? That means looking at evidence, considering different sides.
Full sides.
And asking ourselves, is the Overton window really shifting this much? Or is this just one biased take?
A very specific lens to view it all through.
Exactly.
It might be even more important to think about how we as individuals navigate this confusing world of information and how we form opinions we can actually trust.
Because whether you agree with this source or not, they bring up some really valid points about how we understand, like, the world around us.
How that understanding gets shaped.
Shaped, yeah, that's the key word.
Yeah, it's all about how we process this stuff, right? Especially when it's like these really charged topics. Can't just take it all in, whatever we see or hear.
Right.
We got to engage, question the sources, think about if there are other ways to see it.
So it's like we each have to be our own fact checkers or something.
Exactly.
And to their credit, I mean, the source does try to give specific examples.
Oh, yeah.
To back up these claims about government and media pushing that Overton window left.
Like what?
Well, they talk about how the government funds, like, gender studies programs. And their argument is that shapes young minds in a specific direction. You know.
Interesting.
Then they point to, like, certain media narratives.
Oh, I see.
That they think are pushing agendas.
Okay.
Framing these issues in a way that favors one side over the other.
Right, right.
And then, of course, there's the whole censorship debate.
Oh, yeah, social media.
Social media. Yeah, they say platforms like Facebook and Twitter actively silence people who disagree.
That's a big claim.
It is. Basically controlling what we even see.
Which leads to that.
Enforced conformity.
Yeah, enforced conformity. That's a scary thought.
It is. It makes you think about how much power those platforms have.
It's true. They have huge GE influence.
Massive.
They control the flow of information to, like, millions of people.
Millions, easy.
And there's no doubt their algorithms, they shape what we see and don't see.
But the companies would say they're just trying to create a safe space, right?
Right.
Like an inclusive online environment.
Combating hate speech.
Misinformation.
All that.
It's tough, though, isn't it? Like trying to protect people but also protect free speech.
Where's the line?
Where is the line?
It's a constant debate, no easy answers.
Nope.
But I think what's important is being aware of the potential for bias, you know, in how these platforms actually work.
Yeah. Conscious bias, unconscious bias.
All of it?
Are they really neutral? Or are they promoting some views while suppressing others?
Even if they don't mean to.
Exactly. And how can we as, you know, just users of these platforms?
Right. Everyday people.
How can we be more aware of that potential bias? How do we improve our own critical thinking?
So we're not just passively scrolling and accepting everything.
It's hard, though, isn't it?
Oh, it's a challenge for sure, but a necessary one.
Absolutely. I think even with the source's, strong opinions, they remind us of something really important. Don't just take everything at face value.
Yeah, question it.
Question those narratives you see. Think about why people are saying what they're saying.
Their motivations.
And always, always seek out different perspectives.
Multiple sides to every story.
Which brings us back to that core question of this whole deep dive.
Is it really shifting?
Is that Overton window really moving as drastically and as fast?
As our source says.
As they claim, yeah. Or is this a selective interpretation? Framing things to support a specific agenda?
Good question.
I think the truth is probably somewhere in between,
Yeah, probably.
There have definitely been some shifts in how we talk about things.
Gender identity, the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
For sure. And it's worth looking at how powerful groups like the government,
media, big tech.
Yeah, all of them. What role they play in those shifts.
Absolutely.
But we can't oversimplify either. We got to recognize these issues are complex.
Very nuanced.
There are always multiple perspectives. Things get left out of the debate when it gets heated.
Context matters.
So much. In historical context especially, it helps us understand what's happening now.
It all comes back to us, though, as individuals.
Right.
Engaging with these issues thoughtfully, critically, with open minds.
That's key. And that means being aware of our own biases too, right?
Huge. And finding information from different sources, not just the ones we agree with.
And forming our own opinions.
Informed opinions.
That's the real power of understanding this whole Overton window thing, isn't it?
What do you mean?
It's not just about knowing what's acceptable to say right now. It's about having the awareness to challenge that, to push boundaries, maybe even help shape the future of how we talk about things.
That's powerful, no matter what your political beliefs are.
So to wrap up this part of our dive, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay, hit me.
Think about an issue you really care about.
All right, got it.
Now imagine you have to explain your stance to someone who completely disagrees with you.
Ooh, that's a good one.
How would you even approach that conversation?
Yeah, what would you say? What evidence would you use?
And maybe even more importantly, how would you listen to them?
Right.
Would you be open to changing your mind, even a little?
Because those kinds of conversations, even when they're tough,
Especially when they're
it's
tough.
so important.
They're vital for a healthy society, that willingness to hear each other out. It's tough, but those are the conversations that really make us think, you know?
Push us out of our comfort zones.
Exactly. Even if we don't end up agreeing, at least we're, like, engaging.
Yeah, that open-mindedness, it's how we grow.
As individuals, and as a whole society, like that saying, iron sharpens iron.
Oh, I like that.
And to the source's credit, they brought up something else that really stuck with me.
What's that?
The idea that we're all responsible for shaping these conversations, you know?
Shaping how society talks about these things.
It's not just on, like, politicians or the media. It's on all of us.
It's empowering when you think about it.
It is. That feeling of, like, ownership. We're not just passively taking it all in.
We can actually participate, help shape the narrative.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in. Big time.
Which the source talks about a lot.
Oh, yeah. They might have strong opinions, but they're really pushing us to question everything.
To do our own research, don't just blindly accept what we're told.
Especially from, like, politicians and media. Even those influencers we follow.
Social media is powerful.
They really hammer that home, especially when it comes to the media.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that phrase they use? Propaganda press?
Ooh, loaded.
Super loaded. But it shows how concerned they are about bias, like how the news is reported.
And how certain stories take off while others get ignored.
It's a valid point. We're bombarded with information constantly these days.
24/7 news cycle, it's hard to keep up.
And it's easy to get caught up in it, especially when the topics are, like, emotionally charged.
Makes it even harder to think clearly.
So we got to be careful, be more discerning about the information we consume.
Question the sources, look for evidence, consider different angles.
Before we form our own opinions.
Not just accepting the first thing we see.
It's almost like we have to become detectives.
I like that.
Gathering facts, weighing the
So
evidence.
to our own conclusion.
Instead of just being told what to think. Which is hard when there are so many conflicting stories out there.
Especially when opinions get presented as facts.
Exactly. That's why this whole critical thinking thing is so important.
So how do we get better at it?
Well, learning to spot those logical fallacies.
Recognizing bias.
Understanding the difference between, like, something happening at the same time as something else.
Versus one thing actually causing the other.
That's huge. Those are all essential tools for navigating this crazy world of information.
So we can come to our own conclusions, informed ones.
And remember, critical thinking isn't just about being skeptical.
It's about being open to new ideas, too.
Challenging what we believe.
And having respectful conversations with people who see things differently.
Even when it's hard.
Because that's how we learn and grow, both individually and as a society.
It's what pushes us forward.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Overton window, I want to leave you with this.
Okay, lay it on me.
Don't be afraid to question what you see and hear.
Even if it seems like everyone agrees.
Even then, even from sources you usually trust, do your own research. Think critically.
Come to your own conclusions.
Because the Overton window, it's always moving.
Reflecting our values, our beliefs, what we prioritize as a society.
And we all have a role to play in shaping where that window sits, what ideas are even considered acceptable.
That's a big responsibility.
It is. So be engaged, be informed, be a part of the conversation.
Because the future kind of depends on it.
It really does. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep those minds sharp